Welcome to Thursdays with Franco, and today we've got a special guest, Steve Lawton. Stephen, welcome to TwF.
Hey Franco, thank you for having me.
And Stephen, you've been doing a few interesting engagements, and you tapped me on the shoulder and suggested, hey, this may be something worth sharing on TwF. So can you tell me a little bit about what you've been doing?
Well, as part of the idea of Oracle autonomous database and data warehousing, and then expanding that to take into account other sources of data, different varieties and volumes, there's an idea called the Data Lakehouse, and Oracle has a position on that and a view on that. And that's something I'm going to talk about today. And it's focusing in particular, in terms of, I've got a little bit of a demo on that as well, which focuses in particular on the integration between the OCI data catalog and the autonomous database.
That's cool. That's cool. So to help me understand what you're talking about there, do you have a set of slides we could walk through?
Yeah, so I have a few slides, about 6 or so content, and then I have a demo that walks us through the process of sort of fairly seamlessly, without any management, loading files into Oracle Cloud, into object storage, and then automatically making them available to query the data from those files and object store from essentially an Oracle client.
That sounds like crazy talk. So instead of what I've been doing traditionally over many years, actually loading data and having it in the database, you're suggesting we can set something up just by making files available on our object storage. We can start to interact with them as if they were in a table or in a database.
Yeah, that's right. So there's as you're probably aware, there's always been the option to define what's called external tables in Oracle, where the data is sitting externally. But this is a means of essentially automating that process, so you don't have to think about the structure of the schema yourself. You don't have to do your create table type statements yourself. It's all automated for you, and that whole process is essentially management free and automated. Which I think is a key, the key component there is using the data catalog in Oracle Cloud to do that.
Okay, so let's walk through some of these slides.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just share my my slides initially. So the idea here, just briefly, then, is to talk about, over the last 10 years or so, there's been a number of changes in the sort of wider data analytics landscape. These changes and approaches have required, some new innovative ways beyond the traditional warehouse in order to address these particular needs, requirements, and differing data sets. Some of these changes are things like requirements, the ability to, say, quickly load various types of data and be able to understand it quickly without necessarily having to wait for some lengthy ETL style process. Certainly that might be required, a more formal ETL process, but rather than necessarily having that as an IT-centric approach where you pass the data off and they'll say, well, we'll get back to you in 3 months. The ability to just read that data straight in there. So the term there is schema on read, meaning be able to just load the data in and then worry about how the schema is defined when you want to query that data. Another idea really that needs to be considered is about large volumes of data and the best and the most efficient ways of storing that. Not all data needs to be in SSDs and memory. It can be in other forms and other storage media. And then also the ability to take advantage of these different types and structures of data, which is really what this slide is talking about here. So traditionally we've always had that central area of structured data, customer records, orders, and so on. But then as you expand out there, you're then looking at things like, it might be invoices, PDFs, for example. It might be medical forms there. It talks about social data, could be IoT style data. So those forms of data do not all necessarily lend themselves to loading directly into a database or a data warehouse. And so there needs to be other mechanisms and approaches around that. And that's really what we're talking about today.
Cool.
And so, there have been over the last several years the idea of a data lake, and certain organizations have implemented those. And that's that ability to capture these different forms of data, whether that's things like more big data style formats like Parquet and Avro, but then also things like JSON and other forms, and be able to do that economically as well over large volumes. And then being able to bring different types of processing to that data as well. Now, that is complemented a data warehouse, which offers that sort of curated, structured view with highly complex, high concurrency queries with good performance. But to a large degree, these have been separate entities with their own silos of data sitting in those different structures and storage areas. So the idea of the Lakehouse is to combine essentially the best bits of each of these approaches into a data management architecture that combines the flexibility, cost efficiency, and the scale of the data lake with the advantages of a warehouse around asset compliance, around transactions, and that data management flexibility that you get with a warehouse, enabling across all of those questions, then a central location to store the data and then be able to query and run analytics across that. And so that's the idea of the Lakehouse. And then from an Oracle perspective, and really at a wider market perspective, I'd say there's really 5 key elements to that. The first one is a platform for that curated data and those aspects of it, which is the warehouse. In our case, certainly in the demo today, that's the autonomous data warehouse. There's the data lake where you're storing that repository of data. Again, in our case, that would be a object storage in Oracle Cloud. There's then the ability to use open source services around that. Things like could be Apache Hadoop services, could be Apache Spark, could be also development languages like Python to bring some of those workflows together. And I use Python in my demo shortly, I'll show you. And then there's you still need some data integration capabilities, of course, to bring that data in and move that around. And then finally, the idea of a data catalog there to maintain that complete view of the data. So if you're loading these files into the data catalog, you need to understand, what information do we have in the data lake? How is that structured? Where is it sitting? And how can we maybe even relate that to business definitions of that data? So they're the sort of 5 key elements. Now, in the little demo I've got today to show you, we're really looking at these main 3 areas. So the data lake to store these object files, the files in object store, a data catalog to be able to catalog and discover and harvest the metadata, and then making that available for the data warehouse to consume that metadata and enable seamless queries of that data.
It's a pretty interesting approach what you're highlighting. You think about data warehouse projects, they often take a long time to be useful. What I like about what you've got here is it embraces what we call let's call it the proper approach, but you've also got this lake approach where as things arrive, you can instantly start to take advantage of them. And also, it's not just taking instant use of data, it's also other cool technologies. So whether it's Kafka or someone getting across Python or other things too. This,
Yeah,
this,
I think.
this
Yeah, I think it also enables different types of use cases on the same data. So where you're servicing up, say, your traditional star schema type data sets for business users to consume data, you might have some of the very low level raw transactional data sitting in the lakehouse. And that can be available for different use cases, which could be things like for machine learning models to use for training models and things like that. So it also enables that idea of you're still leveraging the same data, but in new and interesting ways as well.
and for organizations that have been on a data warehouse journey for many years, it sounds like you're helping them, continue to build off that. And you can start to take advantage of these new cool capabilities pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it can be an incremental approach as organizations are coming up with new and interesting use cases. It can be that sort of incremental approach to get more value from existing data. Okay,
so have we got any more slides, or can we get stuck?
Yeah, just one more. So what I'll do is I'll skip given the time. So again, it's the idea that essentially the process flow is data is loaded in object store. Now, this can be an automated approach. It can be a manual approach where you manually add files in, whatever that may be. The files are loaded, and then the data catalog harvests the object storage buckets that we've defined. That derives the schema and all the technical metadata from the files and object store. There's then a sync process from the autonomous database to make that technical metadata available. And then from there, then essentially, you can just use standard Oracle SQL to query both the metadata and also the actual data sitting in external storage in object storage. And you can do that from any Oracle client. It can be a BI tool, Oracle Analytics Cloud or any other one, and it's seamless. And again, it's an automated process.
That's cool.
Okay. So if we look at the demo itself, so the idea here is Oracle has this movie stream sort of fake data set, which is the idea of like a Netflix style set of data where we have customers and they're viewing movies. So in this particular case, on the bottom left is a little example of the main customer contact table that's sitting in the autonomous database. And then what we have is just on the left there, you can see customer extension and customer segment. We have some new additional attributes we'd like to analyze. And these are sitting in CSV files at the moment. So customer segment is essentially segmenting these customers into specific groups, things like, over 60s, under 60s, particular segmentation. And then customer extension is just additional attributes we have on top of that. So the idea is we're going to load in these three files. We're going to convert one into a Parquet file, just to illustrate we can use different formats. And this is all going to be driven by some Python code I've written. So again, you can use some ETL tools to do this in terms of various aspects. But in my case, I've just used some Python code. It interacts with OCI SDK in quite simple fashion. I upload the files into object store. I have object storage files called Lakehouse Bronze, Silver, and Gold. They get loaded into Bronze and Silver, and the Parquet file there. The Python job then runs the harvesting process to harvest the technical metadata from the catalog. Then a simple sync process to make that available. And then from then, essentially, the schemas are available in ADW. And then as a user runs any queries on there, it's essentially accessing the data externally. Okay.
That's cool.
So I will stop sharing this and I'll just share my desktop instead. Okay. Let me exit that. Okay. Minimize that. Okay. So in here, hopefully that's big enough, but you can see I have my list of object storage buckets. I have a bronze, silver, and gold. You can see in the bronze one, there's nothing in there. And the silver one, there's nothing in that one either. You can see in the data catalog I have here, there are no data entities in here because I haven't run anything yet. And you can see if we look at the schemas in here, the object storage schemas will be defined with a DCAT. They'll have the word DCAT dollar in them. You can see there's nothing in there at the moment. So there's nothing currently running in here. What I will do now is I'll run my Python script. And what that will do is it will, first thing it will do is we'll upload these 3 files. So they're my 2 customer extensions and my segment file up into the object storage buckets. It will then run the harvesting process, and then it will finally just run a quick database sync process to make that metadata available. Now I've built a simple, just to illustrate, I've built a simple Oracle Analytics Cloud report, just very simple one, just to illustrate. You'll notice it doesn't work at the moment. That's because we haven't uploaded these files and automatically created data and the schemas. So that I'll come back to that in a second. That will work. It just takes a moment to kick off and load into memory the Python. But then what we'll do is we'll then run a few queries here in here where we can look at, say, this the customer contact. So if I run that now, this is just a table running in ADW. Sorry, let me commit that. It's timed out.
So just to help people see where Stephen is now, we've got this Python program that's going to be loading or working out how to get the awareness of these files on object storage, and then have them so that they can be interacted with in the autonomous database without actually ingesting the data in the autonomous database. But it looks like the Python program
it's working now.
The data catalog.
Yeah, but also, Franco, you don't have to define the schemas either. It does it all for you. Okay, so
that is so cool.
So in this case, it's uploaded, as you can see, the 4 files, 3 CSVs, and it's got a Parquet file. It's run the harvesting process, and it's just finishing off the sync process, and we're done. So if we now look in the bucket files, you'll see in the bronze one, I now have the files available here, customer extension. That essentially now, customer extension is a logical entity where it's essentially, think of it like a table with the files in there. Customer segment here is similarly the same. If we go look in the silver one, we can see there's now a Parquet file in there. Okay, and now if we look in the data catalog, we'll notice it's already refreshed. There are 6 entities in here now. So it's gone off, it's harvested the data automatically from those object files. If we look in one of those, let's say customer segment, we can see the technical metadata around that. So here we can see number of attributes is 3 in that file. Here's the location of it in the Lakehouse bronze bucket. Here are the attributes of that, and here are the files information on that. Notice that also, as part of the data catalog, it has some machine learning smarts in it, which it recommends certain business glossary terms to link it to. So it will automatically give you some suggestions around linking some of this technical metadata to business metadata in a business glossary here. So now we have the metadata available. You can see that. And you notice now, if I'll just quickly refresh that page, you can see, if we now look at the schemas available, you'll notice that there are now 3 new schemas automatically made available to represent the new files that we've loaded. So each of these schemas represents a bucket in object store. So again, we can see the information here, and we can see, I'll forget that. So if we notice, if I just to illustrate here, we look at one of the actual table definitions for this customer segment. in the silver one, we'll notice, just to illustrate, that yes, it's a table and it's defined all this automatically, but it's an external table in Oracle. It's a Parquet format, as you can see, and here's the location of the files it's expecting there. Okay, but from an end user perspective, they don't know or care about this essentially. So what then that enables is, yeah, this keeps disconnecting on me, but what I'll do is what that enables then is you can essentially just seamlessly query these tables as if they're tables in ADW. What I'll do is I thought this might happen, so like a good demo person, I've got it back up. Okay, so we ran the ADW table before. Here's now, if you notice, we've got select short name from this bronze customer segment. So if I run that particular one, that table will now run, and that returns my segments. Okay, I can now run that Parquet file, and that seamlessly just runs as if it's within ADW when it's returning that external data. And then here I have a query that joins together my Parquet file, my CSV files, and an ADW table to return a complete view of my customer within my environment. And there we go. So it's, and again, from an end user perspective, it's seamless. So again, if I now rerun my Oracle Analytics Cloud report, this now will run and it will return data, because as far as the client's concerned, it's just another query it's running. And there we go. So you can see here, in this particular one, it's a breakdown of the different customer segments and the sorts of movies they like to see. Okay. Now, just to illustrate the dynamic nature of this, now I've harvested the technical elements. I don't need to do that again, even if I add new data. So as an example, notice here there's 9 segments, but what I'm missing is one called DINK, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Franco, as a customer segment, it's double income, no kids, which back in the good old days when, you know, we had lots of spare money. So notice I don't have that here. So if I now, I have a file on my desktop, which is customer segment DINK. It's an extra record, just as an illustrative purposes. I want to load that in. Okay, so I'm going to load that in to the bronze one. Okay, that's under customer segment here. I'm going to manually just upload that. Okay, so I'll manually I'll manually just drag and drop that in. I'll drag and drop that CSV in here. Didn't seem to work. There we go. I'll upload that. Okay, so that's, now as you can see, that's uploaded. Okay, now all I'll do is I'll refresh my report here, and you can see the dynamic nature of it. I don't have to harvest anything because I'm not changing the technical metadata in any way. It's just rerunning the report. And you can see now we've now updated very quickly our report to show this new customer segment. And I can now see that information very quickly and dynamically with the data coming from Object Store. So that's the benefits of this around. You can do that harvesting process, but you only really need to do that for brand new structured files with different structures where you're harvesting the technical metadata. Once that's in there, you essentially can just append within this customer segment folder, because this is seen as a logical entity. So you just append additional records. There could be, you know, new months every month that are uploaded. And you don't have to do anything else. It will automatically become available, sitting in Object Store, but it all becomes available in any Oracle client you wish to use. So that's really from the demo perspective, Franco.
And can you bring up your Python code just to show people, you know, what you did there?
I can. It is here.
And there is a question by Jay-Z. Thank you for your question, Jay-Z. Jay-Z asks the question, so does the Python do the upload and the catalog? So I think the
Yeah,
question
good
is,
question. It does everything. Yeah. So here, when I've run the Python one, in my case, I've made it do the upload, which is uploaded the 4 files. I'll show you the code if you like. Then I also do the harvesting process within the Python code. And then I also do the data sync process. Now, the data sync process is just calling an Oracle PLSQL package and executing it. But yeah, so currently I have that. But certainly you could do this as a scheduled job in an ETL process. You could make it event driven, where as users input new files into object storage buckets, it automatically calls an event, and that calls maybe things like an OCI function, where it calls a Python script to automate the harvesting process. There's all sorts of different ways. You could just have it as a scheduled job, you know, the old traditional way, run a nightly job, right? So yeah, there's many different options to do that. So if I, what did I do there? Sorry, if I do, let me just minimize all of that. Okay, so my job, my code here is essentially, let's go, essentially just set up my, because I'm running it on my laptop, so I've got obviously a public-private key set up, and then I upload my Lakehouse files.
Stephen, it's hard to see. I think you're using a big screen.
Oh yeah. Okay. Can I? How do I increase the zoom on the? Yeah, it's quite small, isn't it? Let me see if the old Command Plus works. Oh, there we go. Okay, is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah, so I upload the files. I call the data catalog job, which is a bit of OCI SDK, and then I call the data sync process. So the upload files, you know, in my example here, it's just yeah, I've just hard coded in those 3 files really. So I upload those directly, and then the data catalog job is a bit of OCI SDK, and then the data sync process is simply just a is just that. There's a package called dbms dcat. You can Google that and see the different options here, but run sync, and that's basically one liner, and that just makes the metadata available from data catalog into ADW.
So what you've shown us today is incredible. To me, it's like crazy magic stuff. You know, we spend a lot of time learning about external tables and making sure you understand the definitions and those sorts of things. And what you're doing here is right up my alley. I like.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, exactly.
And I like playing with technology without working hard. I like trying things and learning.
Yeah.
And it also means we can make data available to do other things really quickly, you know, whether it's via Apex or via integration or via analytics or blockchain, etc. I know there's going to be a bunch of people wanting to do this as quickly as possible. So, you know, and this request is especially for Stuart Coggins and probably Jason Grogan, who I know have gotten a bunch of things like this. If they wanted to go through a similar learning journey as you have to be able to show and get to a point you have, what would you recommend?
Well, this particular the idea and the data and the process of that integration really comes from a Live Labs session. So Oracle Live Labs. So literally, we literally type Oracle Live Labs. Go in here. I think maybe Helen can make this available in the chat. And then if you just search for data catalog, first one that pops up, that's the one. So if you look at that, this is where I based my demo from. I looked at the Live Lab, I liked it, and I thought I'll make that into a sort of presentable format. So this particular live lab here has essentially everything you need of what I've covered. So it's talks about setting up the environment, harvesting the metadata from Oracle Object Store, synchronizing the autonomous database with the data catalog, and then querying the data across the autonomous database and the data lake. Really, they're the three things I've illustrated today in a slightly different format, and this doesn't have the Python code that I've written, but it's all those key principles are all there in this live labs. It's a really good one, and it uses the same data around this idea of a movie stream, sort of Netflixy type data set. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. I think we can make that available in the chat, can we?
Thank you very much, Stephen Lawton, for being so generous with what you've learnt and shared. And I totally love the Python code extra bit that you have added.
Franco.
Thank you for your time today. And